Something is happening in Mason, Ohio, and the tournament itself cannot explain it away. Flags are already being packed, chants are already being rehearsed, and somewhere inside the operations office of one of the biggest events on the entire tennis calendar, staff are preparing for a level of noise they did not create and cannot fully control. Why does one 21-year-old with no Grand Slam title to her name generate this kind of gravity before she has even walked onto the court? Why did the tournament itself, in its own official announcement, single her out by name? And what happens when the loudest crowd in the building collides with the most unforgiving, star-studded draw of the season? Stay with this, because the answer is bigger than one player. It is about to become one of the defining stories of the entire hardcourt season. Call her Alex, not a surname, not a headline, just Alex, the way an entire nation has started saying it, like she belongs to them personally. In a matter of days, she walks into the Cincinnati Open, a tournament that does not need a new star. It already has legends: Aryna Sabalenka, Mira Andreeva, Amanda Anisimova, Naomi Osaka, and defending champion Iga Swiatek. This is not a stage where a hot streak can hide. This is a stage that exposes everything, and yet, out of that entire field, the tournament's own player announcement stopped to specifically highlight Alex alongside Brazilian sensation João Fonseca for having, in their own words, some of the most ardent and raucous supporters in the sport. Think about what that actually means. Out of a draw filled with icons, the institution itself is bracing for her fans. Specifically, that is not hype some fan account invented. That is an organization admitting they have noticed something they cannot fully manage. The scale of what she is walking into is almost hard to process in 2025. This tournament pulled in a record 285,571 fans from every state in the country and 65 nations around the world in 2026. Organizers are bracing for nearly 300,000 inside a completely rebuilt 40-acre site that came out of a reported $260 million renovation. New courts, new fan zones, new entertainment. A tournament transformed into something closer to a sporting festival than a single event. Qualifying begins August 11th. The singles final arrives August 23rd, and somewhere inside that massive rebuilt ecosystem, a Filipino walks in carrying the accumulated hope of a country that has waited generations for a moment exactly like this one. But here is where the tension actually lives. And it's worth sitting with for a second. None of this guarantees anything. Flags do not return, serves chance do not save a match point. If Alex walks into Cincinnati and loses in the first round, all of this noise evaporates into nothing. Just another promising story that stalled the moment it mattered most. So why does anyone believe otherwise? Because weeks earlier in Washington, this exact question was already put to the test, and the answer was almost violent in how clearly it was delivered before that tournament even began. The chairman revealed that nearly 80% of ticket inquiries that month were not about the event itself. They were about one specific question: when is Alex playing? That is not the level of attention given to a player still building her name. That is the level of attention given to someone who has already become an event unto herself. And then she nearly blew it in her opening match against former world number 4 and Olympic gold medalist Jung Chi-won. She lost the first set, then fell behind in the second for a moment. It looked exactly like the story everyone secretly feared, the hype outrunning the results, and then, quietly, almost invisibly, something shifted. She clawed her way through, forced a decider, and dismantled Jung in the third set. 6-1, not a scare. A statement. The crowd got louder after that win, not before it. That order matters more than almost anything else in this entire story, because belief that is earned survives losses. Belief that is only borrowed from hype does not. She kept earning hers, match after match, until she reached a final that had no business feeling inevitable, against Jessica Pegula, a former world number 3, a Grand Slam finalist, someone who had spent years in rooms. Alex was only just being invited into. She dropped the first set, then the skies opened and rain delayed the match. If you know anything about tennis, you know rain delays are dangerous in a specific, cruel way. They don't just pause a match. They pause a mind mid-fight and force it to sit alone with every doubt it was trying to outrun. Players have lost matches during rain delays without hitting a single extra shot. simply because their nerves unraveled in the silence. So what did Alex do when the covers came off? She did not hesitate. She took the second set, then closed the third with a ruthless, almost merciless 6-0, not scraped through, closed, against a former top 3 player in a final after a rain delay. And when the last ball landed, something happened that had never happened before in the history of the sport. She became the first Filipina to ever win a WTA Tour level singles title, an entire country's tennis history rewritten in one final set. But greatness does not reward you with rest, it rewards you with higher stakes, because now every tournament she enters is no longer a chance to surprise people. It is a chance to disappoint them before a title. A deep run feels like magic after a title. Anything less than magic can feel like failure, and that is the exact trap waiting for her in Cincinnati, on a far bigger stage than Washington ever was, because this backstory did not start there either. Rewind further to Wimbledon on grass, where the entire foundation of this phenomenon was actually built. Alex became the first player from the Philippines to ever reach the second week of a Grand Slam singles draw in the Open era. Not the first to win a round, the first ever in the modern history of the sport to survive long enough to see the second week. And then came the moment that turned a good tournament into a legend in the making. On center court, one of the most intimidating stages in all of sport, she faced defending Wimbledon champion Swiatek, and she beat her 7-6 in a first set tiebreak that stretched to 9 points. Then 6-2 to close it out. Not a near upset, a win on center court over a defending champion. She later described looking into the stands during that tournament and seeing something she had not expected. A crowd that felt almost like a full house of Filipinos. Despite Wimbledon tickets being some of the hardest in the world to obtain, think about the logistics hidden inside that sentence. People organizing, people flying across the world, people finding a way into one of the most exclusive venues on the planet just to be near her when it mattered. That is not casual fandom, that is identity, and identity-based support behaves completely differently than results-based support. Results-based fans disappear the moment you lose. Identity-based fans show up anyway, because they were never only cheering for a scoreline, they were cheering for what she represents. A country that has produced legendary boxers and basketball stars, but rarely, if ever, tennis players capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with the very best in the world. A 5-week stretch on grass, a WTA 125 title in Birmingham, a semi-final in Berlin, and then that Wimbledon breakthrough pushed her all the way to a career-high ranking of world number 28. 12 months earlier, the conversation around her was cautious whispers about whether she could crack the top 100. Now the conversation has shifted entirely. Not whether she belongs in the top 30, but how much higher she is capable of climbing. When the WTA opened voting for its mid-season fan award, Star of the Swing, the results were not close. She won with nearly 90% of the vote. That number does not happen from casual interest. That happens when an entire fan base mobilizes with the urgency usually reserved for something far bigger than a tennis poll. So here is Cincinnati, arriving at exactly the moment this story cannot afford to slow down. A record-breaking crowd expected a freshly rebuilt, sprawling venue, a draw stacked with legends who have already broken bigger names than hers. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you if you are paying close attention. Every one of her biggest wins so far has raised the ceiling of what people now expect from the next one, and raised expectations are their own opponent, one that does not live on the other side of the net, but entirely inside her own head. Can she carry the weight of an entire country's hope into a draw filled with multiple Grand Slam champions? Can she manage the psychological shift from being the hunter to suddenly being the hunted, the player everyone studies instead of overlooks? Can she walk out in front of nearly 300,000 fans across this tournament, many of them there specifically because of her, and still play like nobody is watching? Nobody knows that is not a dodge. That is the actual truth, and it is exactly why this is worth watching instead of assuming how it ends, because elite sport does not become gripping through guaranteed victory. It becomes gripping through uncertainty wrapped around someone who has already proven she is capable of something extraordinary. If she were ranked 200 and unknown, A first-round exit would mean nothing, but she is not unranked, she is not unknown, she is a champion, now a Grand Slam second-week competitor, a player who beat a defending Wimbledon champion on the most famous court in the sport, which means every match from here. Forward carries weight it did not carry a year ago, that weight will either forge her into something her country has never produced before, or it will become the exact pressure that stalls everything she has built. Nobody watching gets to skip ahead and find out early. You have to sit with it, point by point. The same way she does, and maybe that is the real reason the flags keep multiplying wherever she goes, not because people expect a guaranteed outcome, but because they have learned, over and over, that when things look darkest, down a set, down a break, sitting through a rain delay with a final slipping away. She has a way of finding something extra exactly when it matters most. That is not a guarantee, it is a pattern, and patterns like that are exactly what turn a good athlete into a phenomenon. So when the lights come up in Cincinnati, when her name is finally called and the first Philippine flag rises somewhere in that crowd of hundreds of thousands, followed by another and another, until the chants roll through the stands like something rehearsed. For days, even though nobody planned it at all, remember how this actually started. Remember Washington, where 80% of the questions were about one player before she had even played a match. Remember the third set against Jung, when a struggling comeback turned into a statement. Remember the rain delay against Pagula, and the 6-0 set that followed it. Remember center court, and a defending champion who never saw it coming. None of that happened because a crowd willed it into existence. It happened because, point after point, match after match, she kept finding a way to be the player worth flying across the world to watch. Cincinnati does not need her to already believe that. Cincinnati is simply the next place she has to prove it all over again, against players who have already beaten legends themselves, on a stage that has already broken bigger names than hers. Whether she wins the whole tournament or loses in the very first round is honestly not even the most interesting question anymore. The most interesting question is what she does in the moment right before the pressure becomes unbearable. That split second between the crowd going silent and the ball leaving her racket, that is where every one of her biggest wins has actually happened, not in the celebration after, in that split second before, and in a few days, under lights, in front of the loudest, largest crowd this tournament has ever assembled. We finally get to watch her walk back into that exact split second one more time. Nobody, not the analysts, not the bookmakers, not even her own team, can tell you what happens next, which is exactly why an entire tennis world and an entire nation standing behind her simply cannot look away.